Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim, and I'm joined by Chris and Adam to give our hot takes on the game that we just finished playing, Cthulhu Wars. As always, I'm going to give a brief description of the game and then we'll jump in with our thoughts. In Cthulhu Wars, you play as a faction of one of the great old ones, cosmic horrors based on H.P. Lovecraft's horror fiction. Armageddon has occurred on Earth, and you're trying to become the most powerful ancient horror to fill the void left by human civilization. This is an area control game where each faction is very asymmetric, with the ability to play different types of monsters and ancients and unlocking spellbooks, which each grant a unique ability by completing faction-specific objectives. Actions are taken in turn order by spending power points, and those actions may include basic actions like moving, summoning monsters, creating gates, and battling, or unique faction actions. The game ends when a player reaches 30 Doom points, and the player with the most Doom points will win. But you aren't eligible to win unless you've unlocked all 6 of your faction spellbooks. Cthulhu Wars was designed by Sandy Peterson and published by Peterson Games. So I am excited for Chris to jump in and speak about this a little bit, because this is one of the few games that Chris has actually introduced me to over our gaming history. So Chris, why don't you give me your take on the mechanisms of Cthulhu Wars.
Yeah, sure, Tim. I think the mechanisms in this game are incredibly cool. I think a lot of the Peterson games tend to be asymmetric, and this one is extremely asymmetric. And I think that adds a lot of fun and interest to the game, because there are, I believe, six base factions that you can play. And is that right? Is it 6?
It's 4. I think it's 4 in the.
Is it 4? Okay.
Yeah, in the base game.
Yeah, there's a bunch more you can buy in expansions. But okay, so there's 4 base factions you can play, and they're all entirely different. I mean, for those who are not familiar with the game, you have 3 different kinds of characters you can play. You can play acolytes, which are your little humans. They're the ones who kind of get things done for you. And you've got the monsters, which speaks for itself, and your great old ones, which is a concept that will be very familiar to anybody who's a fan of H.P. Lovecraft. Those are the ancient horrors of the universe. And you may have, for example, an ancient horror who has some power that it feels like you're just going to drop a bomb every time. But then the other guys have the same, a power that's entirely different, but is just as badass. So you can think that you've got the hook into it, but you almost never do. And you can always have someone that comes back and pulls something that you never see coming, unless you're paying a lot of attention to it.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here actually really quickly. So there's the mechanisms for me. The most interesting mechanism is also the most frustrating mechanism to me in this game, and that is that each faction has unique spell books, which are basically when you unlock a spell book. So each player mat has 6 spaces with objectives on them, and they're all completely different. And then once you complete one of those objectives, you get to put a spell book, which is like an ongoing extra ability that you get onto your player mat, and you have that ability for the rest of the game to do. And that's really cool. It's really fun because both every faction plays completely different. So from a replayability perspective, every game feels different, and as you play different factions, it's always like a different puzzle and different opportunities to kind of exploit those things. But also, it's really interesting because each game you can also just take advantage of the situation and say like, hey, this game, I really need to do this a little bit better. So I'm going to add this one spell book and make my faction a little bit better from that one perspective. That's awesome. It's really cool. The problem with those spell books and with the complete asymmetry in this game, not only with the spell books, but even with the monster abilities and things like that, is that it's extremely hard to tell what your opponents can do in the game. And so I think it makes it a hard game to teach. There's a pretty high level of entry because if you know the game and you try to bring somebody else into it, they have so much information they have to take in on that first play and even on some subsequent plays that it gives a player who's played a lot a big advantage. And I think that's a pretty big fault in a game. And then the other problem with it is that it's just so many times, even in tonight's game, where a player was just like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And everyone else is like, what? How are you doing that thing? And they're like, well, it's on my spell book on my player mat. And it's fine. Like if you go in and you expect that, and that's kind of what I go into Cthulhu Wars expecting now, is that like, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to try to keep an eye on things, but once in a while I'm going to get surprised, and I can't let it impact my feeling too much because it's just going to happen. And I think that's a little frustrating though when you're going in there and trying to be competitive and just trying to play your best game, and all of a sudden something comes out of the blue that you can't do anything about. So I really like the idea of the asymmetry in the spell books, but I also the way that it presents itself and how much information you have to absorb to understand what everything can do on the board is a little frustrating to me. What about you, Adam?
Actually, let me just chime in there to say real quick that I mean, as much as I enjoy the asymmetry, I completely agree with what you just said. It truly is a blessing and a curse.
Agreed. I couldn't agree more with you guys. I was reading today in a little group that part of game design and part of the enjoyment of playing a game is learning it and learning those systems and kind of the discovery and mastering those systems. So again, it is a blessing and a curse because it's so hard to master not only your own faction that you're playing, but 3 other players. You really need to master those to know what they can do. So the mechanisms, they're fun. If that's your thing, if learning your one faction and then learning all these other factions, if that's something you're into, if that's something you can handle, or if you're going to have multiple plays over time with maybe the same group and kind of work you build that up that base and get to that high level, then this game's great. For me, I'm still in that lower level where I'm getting my ass kicked all over the place level, but it's still a very enjoyable, and I really like the discovery process. I hung in there a little bit. No, I didn't really hang in there. I still had fun though. It's still a great game.
So there's one other mechanism, or there's a couple other mechanisms I think are worth calling out here. I do think the spell books and the asymmetry are the most unique, and the asymmetry extends beyond the spell books, but also to every monster has different powers and costs, and every ancient old one definitely has unique powers, and there's also just a unique ongoing ability that every faction has. So that's really neat. There's a couple things though in a game like this, an area control game. I think it does a really good job of forcing conflict, since the points come from controlling gates, and gates are expensive to put out, but they're sometimes less expensive to just take over. And also, that when you're taking over a gate, you're taking that power from somebody else, which is going to, present itself as future potential points and opportunities and things like that. So I think Sandy Peterson did a really good job when designing this game of coming up with the idea of kind of forcing that conflict in, which doesn't always occur in area control games. There isn't a lot of opportunity to turtle in this game, which you can't have in other places. So I think that's pretty interesting as well. Any other thoughts from you guys on mechanisms?
Yeah, unlike lots of area control games, you don't really get points directly from battling. It's like you're saying, Tim, you battle, and maybe if you win, there's really no outright wins either. You can so the way you can either pain somebody, so a 4 or 5 forces another character from the other faction out of that area, and a 6 kills your enemy's dude out of that area. But even that, it's just more of a hindrance rather than direct points. So you can hinder with the opportunity to, again, capture a gate and then maybe get some points for your actions in the future. So it's a little convoluted. It's not direct as you might think.
Yeah, and I like you brought up the combat and how pains versus kills, right? So this is a game that has a pretty simple dice rolling system. I think when the term Ameritrash was created, somebody was looking in the future and said Cthulhu Wars, this is the ultimate representation of Ameritrash, because it is huge, like lavish production and lots of dice rolling and a bit of luck and combat and all of the stuff that Ameritrash represents. But
don't be so judgy, man. Don't be so judgy.
I didn't say Ameritrash was bad. It's the term someone else came up with. But the dice rolling system is actually pretty elegant, and I like it. I like if you're going to go with a dice rolling system that is, very luck based, it shouldn't be extended too long. And Star Wars Rebellion is a great example of a dice combat system that I think is problematic because it is luck based, but it can really drag on in Star Wars Rebellion, where you roll dice. Okay, I didn't quite do anything yet. The other person rolled dice and keeps going back and forth. And this one's really straightforward. Both people, you roll the number of dice equal to the power that you're bringing into combat. And, you're playing the odds. So if you go in with a lot of power and the other person has less power, most likely you're going to win. You're going to kill their people, or you're going to send them out of the area. But every once in a while, you get that really fun, exciting moment where, hey, I just rolled 13 dice and I got all misses. And my opponent rolled 3 dice and they just got 3 kills and took out, 3 of my characters. And so that's a fun part of an Ameritrash game where you can you can have those big, exciting moments. But also you can strategize and go in with the knowledge that most likely, if I go in with the right number of characters, I'll have the power to win this combat. So I think it's good that it just goes quickly. And, especially when you're playing a 4-player game like tonight, we don't have to sit and wait around for 15 minutes for 2 players to resolve their combat. It's like really quick, everything's done, we move on to the next player. So for a dice-based combat system, I think it's pretty functional, pretty nice.
Yeah, agreed. Yep.
All right, well, let's move on to something I think is going to, be worth talking about on this game specifically, and that's the production. So, Adam, what are your thoughts on the production of the game? You've played it both in person and online now, so tell us what you think about it.
The production is pretty great. You had all these miniatures from, I don't know, some miniature scale, but you have little, 1-inch high ones up to, I don't know how big they get up to, 8-9 inches or something. These things get
at least
participation trophy award size. So you're like
as big as a soda can,
smashing
almost.
this thing, which is what I earned tonight, by the way, participation award. So you bust out, you pay for one of your big old monsters, and you're crushing it on the table in front of everybody's face, and it makes it fun. Do you pay for that production? You sure do, but it's there, and it's fun if that's what you're into.
Yeah, Chris, what about you? Any thoughts on the production?
Yeah, let me go back a second and say that this is a game. This is one of the first games that I ever got as a relatively serious hobby gamer, and it was right after Tim had introduced me to Board Game Geek, and I just went on there and said, I looked at the top games of all time, and just looked for ones that look cool to me, and I'm going to invest in something. And what do I know I like? I like monsters. I like Cthulhu. I like big miniatures, and I like heavily themed games. And of course, this one jumped right out at me. And when I got this like 10-pound box in the mail with these huge soda can sized figures in them, I knew this was the game for me. I knew that was going to be it. And
speaking of soda cans in production, wasn't there some kind of cat soda that came in one of the Kickstarters?
There was a Kickstarter recently for, it's actually a Peterson expansion that can be used in a number of different games, but it actually this is one of the games you can use it in. And one of the things they added on, why the hell they did this, I have no idea. I can't fathom why. But the add-on was an energy drink called the Cannon Yellow, which is a goof on the King in Yellow, which is one of the Cthulhu Mythos characters. But I wish I'd had my can with me tonight, because man, I was ready to rock it. But yeah, the pieces are great. The board is huge. I mean, you have to have an extra large table to even play this game. And if you like that kind of vibe, this is the game for you, because it is big, it is bad, it is heavy, and you got plenty of spaces to spread out and play in this one and roll your dice. So I love it.
Yeah, the miniatures are obviously the thing that stands out the most when you see this game. It has huge table presence, but I don't even think seeing it in pictures does it justice. Like, when I've seen these miniatures, they're huge, and they're clearly assembled, pre-assembled. They're all very brightly colored, unique to the factions that you're playing with. So it's very obvious to tell whose pieces on the board are for which player. But the bigger pieces, like you think the Cthulhu mini or some of the larger ancient old ones, you can see that there's several different pieces kind of glued together. They're so large that they couldn't do them in just one sculpt and one mold. And they're so super detailed too. Like, when I played this game in person, I could literally, and you know how it is on Chris's turn, it could be 15 minutes before it comes back to me.
Wow.
And I could sit there and just examine these minis for, like, there's so much detail and they're so grotesque. So if that's not your thing, man, stay away from this game, because they were very, they're monstrosities. They're very grotesque. They very much bring out kind of the idea of the Cthulhu mythos and the strangeness that comes from those cosmic creatures that are coming out of nowhere. So the minis do a great job with that. I have a couple other thoughts, though, on the production as well. The number one other thing that I thought kind of stands out to me for this game is the board. And this is maybe on the mechanism side as well. But the board is pretty neat, because it's actually a very large board that's split into 2 pieces. But you can, based on the player count, you turn those pieces over. So if you're playing a 2-player game, you have it, both sides of the board are on like the 3-player game side is what they're labeled. So there's just less territories on the board. But if you go up to 3 players, you flip one of those over so that it kind of splits up some of the territories so that you end up with more territories on that side. You go to a 4-player game, you flip the other side over, so there's even more territories. So I think that's a pretty clever mechanism for an area control game to, based on player count, to very easily be able to switch to support other players without just blocking off more spaces or just leaving it open and less confrontational. And I found this game between 2, 3, and 4 players, which we played it, that it really does kind of feel just as tight at all of those player counts. You don't feel a big difference between 2, 3, and 4 players. So, and the board, because I'm speaking about it in the production segment here, the board is really beautiful. It's really colorful. It's very easy to see which segments represent a region on the board. And so I think the board is worth calling out from a production perspective.
I want to say the production doesn't stop at the base set here. They've had, I think, 3 waves. This is the Damon Sultan, I think, is the final onslaught wave of print runs with this thing. Just looking at Board Game Geek, there's 49 expansions listed. So a lot of those are maps, and a lot of those are factions, and a lot of those, I don't even know. They get creative, and there's plenty of
energy drinks.
There you go. There's just plenty to get if you're willing. For this game,
I still remember the day that it was like April Fool's Day a couple years ago. A lot of companies, especially game companies, tend to release their press releases about the crazy BS that they're putting out on Kickstarter or whatever. And Sandy Peterson on April's Fool's Day released he's doing the cat faction for Cthulhu Wars, and it seemed like it was going to be an April Fool's Day joke. It turns out that you could actually back it, and they were actually doing a cat faction for Cthulhu Wars. So.
Which I've got coming soon too.
There's just looking at a couple of factions. There's giant blind albino penguins coming out this year. There's the Choo Choo tribes. There's this brown Jenkin, whatever that is. So it just goes on and on and on with the creativity and the production and minis that go with each of these.
So that's interesting because from a reverse perspective. Kemet Blood and Sand just had the Kickstarter this year, and there was a bit of an uproar when Kemet decided to release some expansion content or some extra content that was Cthulhu related, and people went crazy. They're like, Cthulhu is not, that's all the ancient Egyptian themed, and that people are like, Cthulhu is not ancient Egyptian themed. That's nonsense. Get that out of our game. They're so angry about it, but yet with the Cthulhu Wars, you can release any type of content, and it doesn't seem like, at least I haven't heard people getting upset about that. So I guess that's the insanity that comes with following a lot of Cthulhu stuff, a lot of H.P. Lovecraft stuff.
No, if you haven't read At the Mountains of Madness, you need to. Well, actually, no, sorry, it's not The Mountains of Madness. That's a movie. I'm blanking on the name, but it's a Lovecraft story, one of the great ones. And it has the albino giant penguins. So those fans of Lovecraft, waiting for those guys for a while.
It's all canon. Okay, what about the Choo Choos? Is there a book with trains in it?
That one I'm not sure. And actually, I was right. It is at the Mountains of Madness. I was confusing it with In the Mouth of Madness, which is a great movie. It's a Lovecraftian horror story, but it is not an actual Lovecraft story. But At the Mountains of Madness is, and it's great. And it's got giant albino penguins. You should read it.
All right, guys. Well, let's move on for a minute here. So let's talk about our favorite moments of the game tonight. And I think tonight had a few memorable moments. But Chris, I'll start with you. Anything that any moments that stood out to you, so our listeners can get a feel for what playing this game is like.
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head before, Tim, when you were talking about the big dice rolls. And I had several of them this game, but for anybody who's played a game with me knows that I have an amazing ability to roll badly every time. And so I'm really gun shy in combat games like this because I'm always afraid that I'm going to roll lousy and no matter how much power I'm bringing to a fight, and I'm going to get my butt kicked every time. And this time I was like steadily rolling those 6s, at least in a way that wasn't a statistical anomaly. And and that to me was enough. That it warmed my heart and made me feel like I'd played a good game.
All right. What about you, Adam?
Yeah, Chris, you did have some suspiciously nice rolls there. For me, this game, it started off, I was doing all right. I was working my faction. I was doing kind of what I was supposed to do, building a nice foundation. And then mid game, I don't know if it was Chris, somebody came in and just crushed me. I think it was Chris down in South America, just ruined my whole life. So I thought it was down and out, and the only salvation was stomping on Tim a little bit at the end, and
whatever it takes.
So I was down out, I was demoralized, and then a little bit of boots on Tim, and I eked out a third place participation award. So that was my highlight of the night.
So this, games like this are dependent on the group. Like when you have super asymmetric powers, you can't trust that the asymmetric powers are going to be balanced, right? The players kind of have to control the balance in the game, and you don't let somebody run away with it. Except in our group, apparently, where everybody just let Chris run away with it tonight. And my favorite moment of the game tonight was that for the first time, I played about 11 or 12 games of this now. I think it was 12. Chris finished the game. He ended the game by passing the 30-point doom tracker, and none of the rest of us had gotten all of our spell books out. Most of us were under 15 points probably at that point. So Chris more than doubled our score to finish the game in a fairly early win. And that was awesome. It was fun to see that huge explosive win in a 4-player game. I don't think that's the game that did it. I think it's that our players really sucked tonight. And somehow I was just getting pounded into the ground, like everybody all night long, when Chris was clearly going to be the winner the whole night. And yet all night long, the last power phase, when the game ended, I ended up gaining 3 power, and Chris had 19. Everybody else was in the teens. And still somehow, Adam, your last move was to come in and stomp on me and take something else from me. So
I knew I had no chance at anything else, man. So I was going to claw and scratch my way to a third place finish.
It's worth mentioning that Tim is way ahead, number 1 in our game league. So there is that.
Right. So I wasn't well aware of the league standings. Tim's in first place by a wide margin. So if I can put him down in 4th, I'm gonna do it.
I think that's worth talking about. I mean, a game like this, there's definitely a lot of meta that happens in an area control game or an asymmetric game, because this is not multiplayer solitaire at all. Right, it's completely opposite of what we talked about when we mentioned Wingspan last week, where basically nobody can sit there and just kind of run their engine and just get away with it unless we let them, which happened tonight. The players have to interact, and they have to control each other. And what I find really fun, and also really frustrating sometimes in these types of games, is that we play a game league where we kind of keep track of scoring over the league. And I think there is an element of kind of leaning in against whoever's in the lead in the league. In games like this, where
we're all nodding our heads. All of us, Chris and I are just like, yep, that's right.
That's right. So those of us at the top just get beat down on in a game like this. And it's fun. Having a meta game is good. I think it's good when people can understand when there's, when the best player in the table, you don't want to let them always win all the time.
Oh, it's so hard being Tim, man. It's so hard being Tim.
So for me, from a moment perspective, I thought it was great to see Chris take away that win. There was a lot of table talk with me just come on, guys, why aren't you going after Chris? And they're like, nope, we're going to do our thing. In fact, why don't I just step on you a little bit more, Tim, tonight? And so it actually leads to a lot of fun, moments, a lot of fun conversations. It can be frustrating, but it can also be, exciting. So I think that's worth noting in a game like Cthulhu Wars. All right. So the next question is, would we request to play the game again? I'm going to jump in first here, since you guys have led on the last couple of questions. I will never request to play Cthulhu Wars for some of the reasons I mentioned, and the reality is that there's a type of game that I like. I'm definitely would consider myself a Euro player more. I do like interaction in games, though. Again, we talked about Wingspan last week being a little bit too low on the interaction. I think that's true, but I like Euro games where you can find a strategy and pursue it. And people can get in your way, and you can interact with people, and you can try to stop a leader. But I like having some control in games, and really almost any area control game really takes that away from you. Cthulhu Wars, Blood Rage is another one that we play frequently in Ish. These games are always fun. They always have fun moments, but they're also, for me, not my favorite style of play. So that's why I personally will probably never choose Cthulhu Wars on a game night. That being said, I'm always happy to play it. When Steve, I think, brought it up tonight, it was his pick for tonight. And I was like, yes, absolutely. Let's get in there. Let's do it. Let me see what I can do with it. And I think part of the reason why these games aren't great for me personally is not only the lack of control, but it's that they do require, to an extent, a little bit of negotiation, a little bit of manipulation of the other players. And I'm terrible at it. I just put all my cards on the table. I've got no poker face. I'm always trying to convince people what they do, and all that does is make everybody go after me. And so I'm just not good at these types of games. So they're not the most fun. They don't really fit my niche. So I won't usually pick something like this, but I do still enjoy playing it. What about you, Adam? Would you choose Cthulhu Wars on another game night?
I think this is a good discussion you brought up about the sort of the Euro game, like mastery of that Euro puzzle. And I see the smartest way to trade my resources to get what I need to put my guy here to gain the most points, versus something like most dudes on a maps game, especially Cthulhu Wars, where it's almost chaotic. I say chaotic, but usually the same guys are in, I don't know if you know what you're doing. Lots of times the same guys are in first or second. At least I'm consistently near the back of the pack. So I think there is a skill margin. If played well, I think the same guys are going to win, repeatedly, or have statistically higher chances of winning. So I really like that discussion. I was reading some more about that today too, on, do you want to take the IQ, the school test of who's mastered this Euro game puzzle the best, or who can manipulate the table and kind of, surprise attack from here, or see the immediate vulnerabilities in other people's strategies and take advantage of that. So I like that discussion. Now, going back to would I request this game? I don't know if I would. I think there's a place for it. Maybe if we're having in the future, when there's no coronavirus, a weekend get together and we know that a bunch of games are on the menu and there's a rowdy Saturday night, we're going to have some drinks. Yeah, let's get out the Cthulhu Wars, have some drinks, roll some dice, and beat each other up. So the right moment, I think that could be fun. But I think even a toned down, even something like Eclipse has a little more Euro element to it. A little, you can develop your own strategy before just getting punched around like in Cthulhu Wars. So it's a tough call. I don't know, in the right situation, a very rare situation, 10% of the time, maybe I'd request it. But other times, there's other games I prefer. Having said that, it's a fun game and I enjoy my plays.
I want to jump in really quickly before we go to Chris here, but you mentioned the idea of, is it just about finding that perfect Euro puzzle optimization? And I think that there is a mix there, right? Like I also agree that you don't want a game where the best player, the winning player, is always going to be the one who's played it the most times. I think that if you can add some randomness or some opportunity for players to interact or have an impact on the other players, I think is fantastic. I think that's for me, that's an important part of that mix. Like, I love Euro games, but I like Euro games that also depend a little bit on some of the tactics that come up and drawing cards and trying to do what the best you can with those cards and take advantage of them, but also potentially being thwarted by what some other people are doing on the board. So I like that. But yeah, I think Cthulhu Wars, as we were just talking about, kind of pushes it a little bit past that comfort level of saying, like, I've got any agency at all or any control. You're right. The players who play the most still are probably going to do pretty well here. But if everybody's playing optimally, or if everyone's playing with a little bit of experience, they can usually thwart another player, whether it's because that's the best player or because they just want to screw with them. Like, that's one of the challenges with a game like this.
And before I let Chris talk, exactly.
You're not talking tonight.
And you're exactly right. I want to say, like, the three other players, if there's 4-player game, the 3 other guys at the table, there is that gang up on the leader element, whereas you might not have that in a Euro. You can't really, but this game, you can, the 3 players can agree to go after the leader. You can bring the guys, rein them in, which is something we didn't do tonight. But that possibility was there, and I like that possibility is there. And again, that's not something that's in every game. So that's cool. So Chris, finally, if you're ready, go for it.
I'm not sure I need to say anything. I can just sit here and the silent glow of victory. No, I will definitely pick this game or games very similar to it. I won't just because there's something about this kind of game, this kind of dudes on a map game, the area control, that it creates a very different kind of game night, especially with us. I mean, we were playing Wingspan recently. It's a very solitary game, and there's not a lot of talk. And there's kind of like, okay, I just did this, your turn. I just did this, your turn. And that that's one kind of thing. In this game, I mean, it got pretty raucous, and that's kind of fun. I mean, that can be it's interesting, especially for something a little bit different. That it's not the same thing all the time, and the Euros tend not to bring out the personality quite as much as a good area control game. So absolutely, I think it's great. I will definitely be asking for it again. And this game is, like I said, is one of my first true board game loves. So I'll be back with it. And judging from Steve, our fourth, his reaction and the fact that this is one of his, I believe, favorite games of all time. I imagine we'll be playing it again from time to time, as long as Adam and Tim are willing to do it.
Well, we'll see, because Steve won, I think, the first two plays that he had of it, and on his third play, he got knocked down to a far second place, so it might not be his favorite of all time anymore.
Oh, we'll see.
Well, the more you talk about it, Chris, the more the more you get into it, man. Because you're right, there is that player interaction. It gets ruckus. The personalities come out, and that's really why I like to board game and hang out with people. So that's you can't go wrong with that.
All right. Well, I think that'll wrap up our conversation on Cthulhu Wars tonight. But before we end for the night, one more question for you guys. And I'll start with you, Chris, since we kept you waiting so long to talk. We'll let you keep going here. Is there anything you're excited about in board gaming this week?
Yeah, very much. I think a couple of weeks ago, I had mentioned just getting Calico and enjoying it a lot on first play. Pretty nice little midweight game, but the art was beautiful, had a lot of fun, easy game to teach. My wife likes playing it. Flat Out, the company that makes Calico, this week went live on Kickstarter with their new game Cascadia, which I don't know much about. I have not looked at it closely yet, but the art is amazing. It's very much themed after the Great Northwest. It's wildlife and trees and national parks looking stuff, and I think it looks great. I'm going to be looking into that, seeing if it's something that's different enough from Calico that it's something that I should invest in. But if you haven't looked at it, it definitely is worth a look.
Yeah, I've actually heard amazing things about that so far. And if I understand right, I don't think it's even just the same game company. I think it's the same designer on both of those games. I'm actually just trying to check that right now.
Oh, that may be right. Yeah.
But it does look like a similar kind of tile laying game. But yeah, I've heard really good stuff about it so far. So I'm not positive that it's the same designer, but people seem pretty excited about that Kickstarter. So cool. Well, once you get it, then we'll have to give it a shot and see how it goes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. What about you, Adam?
Well, before I get into that, we talked about parks last week. I think I mentioned you get to flip your campfire when you get to the end. It's when either hiker gets to the end of the trail, they get to flip their campfire back over. So I had that rule mixed up. Just want to issue a correction.
Yeah, we taught you the game, I think, and we messed up that rule. So.
Okay, so forgive me, but I found Top Gun, the board game, at Target for like $13. The movie, I can't stand the movie, but I do respect the 80s artwork of the game. It's kind of a nice production, and for $13, man, even just a little fighter ship, you get two little ships, little airplanes you get to fly around, F-18s or whatever they were. So it's cool, and it's actually, I dug around in it just a little bit. The tactics are great. You have the movement is cool for the dogfight scenario, and after the dogfight, actually before the dogfight scenario, you play some volleyball and you get yourself some tactics for the dogfight scenario. So it's kind of a fun, cheesy, incredibly cheap game that I found at Target. So looking forward to digging around with that a little bit more.
And I've heard that it accurately represents the life of a military pilot. Is that
That's
accurate, Adam?
That's all I remember doing was volleyball and dogfighting. So it's about right.
So Adam, that's another one of the Funko games, right? The Prospero Hall designed games.
It is. It's Prospero Hall again, coming up with some. This one hasn't got as much press as a few of the others, but it's a fun little game. It's just 2-player. It says 4-player, but really that's kind of the third and fourth player kind of tacked on. So it's really just 1v1.
Yeah, that's how I feel about 2v2 volleyball too. It really should just be one person on each side of the net.
It just makes more sense.
So have you actually, aside from like taking out and reading the rules, have you actually played it 2-player at this point?
Well, so just me against me, and then I had my 5-year-old daughter playing one side a little bit, so It didn't get the full effect. So that's why I'm waiting for this weekend. My dad's coming to town. I'll see if I can get him to play it.
Nice, but there's a game in there, so it looks like it's actually fun.
There is. So the dogfight part, for instance, so you have your weapons officer and your pilot. So you get 2 little movements. So it's each movement is 2 hexes, and so you stack these. It ends up being 4 hexes on top of each other. So you have 3 total hexes of movement, if that makes any sense, to kind of orient your ship. And you want to target lock the other airplane in front of you, and based on which EWO, so that's electronic warfare officer, based on which EWO card you play, you target to the left, or you target to the center, or you target to the right. So you want to try to maneuver your airplane first of all, and then the EWO coordinate with the EWO to play the card to get them in your sights. If you're up higher, you get an extra dice. If you're down below, you lose a dice. If you're even, you just get whatever dice is on the EWO card. So it's cool. It's got some really neat ideas in there.
Nice. That sounds interesting. Well, right on. Okay, well, I've got a couple things that I'm kind of excited for this week. The first one being that the Castles of Burgundy by Steffenfeld is one of my favorite games of all time. I've played it probably 60 plus times. It was one of the first games that I picked up when I kind of got into the hobby, and it's been a great hit with my family, with my wife, with friends. It's just a really strong Euro strategy game. And about a year ago, maybe 9 to 12 months ago, Steffenfeld and Ravensburger, who produced Castles of Burgundy, they kind of teased a new game called The Castles of Tuscany. They just showed a cover of the game, and just having that kind of link between the names was enough to get a lot of people excited, including myself. So they did release the rule book about a month ago, and that's available right now in English. But I just saw that this week, a lot of English reviewers are starting to get copies of the game. So I'm excited this week to really get to understand a little bit more about how the game plays and how it feels and how they feel it compares to Castles of Burgundy. I don't know that I need something that's too competitive with Castles of Burgundy, because I'd almost rather be, just play Castles of Burgundy or play a different game. But it does have me intrigued. I read the rule book. It seems like it might be just a little bit lighter, like a few less decisions to make than Castles of Burgundy. And it does have an element of something that I don't typically like in games, which is a little bit of set collection, where basically the choices that you make, instead of being based on a dice roll like Castles of Burgundy is, in this case, it's based on if you can play 2 cards of the same type, then that's the type of action you can take in that turn. So it might work okay. It'll be interesting. So I'm looking forward to seeing some gameplays and just hearing some reviewers' thoughts on it. So that's got me kind of excited. That's finally coming out. The last thing that's got me excited is that the way that our game group picks our game every week is that we rotate. And so we have the 4 of us typically play together. And so every 4 weeks, one of us gets to pick the game that we're playing for that week. And I'm excited because this next week is my pick. Finally, I get to get away from all these area control games, all this nonsense that you guys pick, and we get to play a nice heavy Euro game, which is what I'm excited about. But I'm going to make it a little bit more interesting this week. So one of the fun things that we usually do when we're picking games is whoever's picking usually picks 3 games, and then the group kind of votes on what they want to pick out of those 3. So whoever's picking the game really gets to kind of head the direction, or make some of their favorite choices, but the group kind of decides which one we actually pick. What I want to do this week is actually let our listeners have a little bit of input here. So if any of you guys are wanting to hear a review or our hot take review on one of these games next week, drop a note. I'll give you the links for Twitter and for Facebook and for our Board Game Geek Guild. But if you drop a note and say which of these games you're interested in hearing about, we'll let your vote count just as much as one of our normal game group votes. So the 3 games that I'm looking at bringing in next week: Gaia Project, Underwater Cities, and Paladins of the West Kingdom. So 3 kind of meaty, heavier Euro games, 2 which I've played and absolutely love, 1 that I haven't had a chance to play yet. But I would love to play any one of those games next week. So I'm excited for that to be our next game night. And like I said, if any of you listeners would like to listen to hear our review on one of those things specifically, we'd be happy to take your input, and maybe that's what will get played next week. So I think that will wrap us up this episode of Board Game Hot Takes. You can find us on Twitter at BG_Hot Takes, on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes, and on BoardGameGeek.com under Guild 3804. Tell us what you thought of our takes on the game we played today. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, take care.
Good night.
Bye-bye.